From Ukraine, there are reports of mass graves found near the city of Mariupol. Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk interviews Eva Bartlett, analyst based in Moscow, a witness to the events that actually took place there.
Yes, greetings from Donetsk in the People's Republic of Donetsk. Yesterday there were reports of mass grave of about 9,000 people near Mariupol. It turns out that it wasn't quite true. So we are going to speak now with Eva Bartlett, an analyst based in Moscow who was there yesterday to tell us what really happened at that supposedly mass grave that was discovered in the region. Eva, thanks for being with us. What happened? You were at the cemetery.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It really makes me angry when I see just such blatant war propaganda. So basically, all of Western media is repeating the same lies, almost word for word, verbatim, based on the former mayor of Mariupol, who's now nowhere near the city. And they're saying that there's a town to the west of Mariupol, about 12 miles to the west, and they're saying there's a mass grave there that Russians have been trying to hide their war crimes by burying people in a pit. And they described it as a pit with like 30-meter wide trenches, and they're saying, the mayor is saying that Russia's trying to hide its barbaric crimes, this is a quote from him, by throwing bodies in the pit. And so, you know, this evokes all sorts of emotion amongst, you know, viewers and readers. But in fact, I went there with a fellow journalist yesterday, and what we found was a cemetery that was already there, and then new graves, and we tallied them up, and they were somewhere between 200 and 300 if you want to be generous, some of which, by the way, were empty. They were graves awaiting newly deceased people, but they were all very orderly. Some of them had crosses, some of them had the names of the deceased and the birth dates, others didn't, and they simply had numbers according to when they were buried. And then by chance, well, we were both just talking and saying, you know, this does not strike me as the scene of a mass grave. But as we were talking, two grave diggers appeared, and we chatted with them, and we explained what the West has been saying. They said absolutely not. They said they have personally buried everyone in the graveyard. Every person has their own single grave and are buried in a coffin, and they both emphasized that they try to treat the bodies with dignity and bury them as humanely as possible. And interestingly enough, there's even a spot in this region for Ukrainian soldiers. So they made the point that, you know, even though these are Ukrainian soldiers that were fighting against us, they deserve to be buried.
And there was we saw, you and I have been together to Mariupol like a month ago, and in our the trips that we did after that, we found that there were many bodies that were buried by the families elsewhere. So maybe it's just those bodies that they are finding, what they are bringing to this cemetery, and trying to identify them and organize this mess that was created after the combats?
You know, I actually was wondering that myself. I was making the point, like, we have no way of knowing how or when these people died. The ones that did have a date of birth written on the grave marker, most of the people were elderly, born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 1930s, 40s, 50s. So, you know, they could have died from any number of causes, but there's no indication of what they died of or when or by whom. But I also made the point, you know, Mariupol was ruled by Ukrainian forces, among them Azov and other Nazi battalions, and we know from now the many testimonies that have come out of Mariupol after it was liberated that these Nazis ruled in a very brutal way, including point-blank execution. So, you know, I would not be surprised if among the dead are people that were executed by Nazis, but we have no way of knowing.
Life seems to be normalizing in Mariupol and other places. This is in your assessment, is it that happening? You know, many of these things that we hear, like this, mass graves, are published as truth without any second confirmation or new sources by the Western media. And now that's a truth that there is in Western media. 9,000 bodies were buried in a mass grave in Mariupol. So how do you see this this ethics in journalism that is happening now?
A lack thereof, a lack of ethics for sure. Well, you made a good point. In most media reporting on this, they will say, in small print, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs down, we cannot independently verify this. But you know, it's by then it's too late, because the headlines are screaming about mass graves and Russian war crimes, right? And the average reader maybe doesn't even make it to the 4th paragraph. They do, it's going to be lost on them. So the whole point is that the media know that they are deceiving. Even if they were to come to the very site that I went to yesterday, they would still lie. They would still deceive. We saw this in Volnovakha. There were French media that went there, and they did not tell the true story about why a hospital was damaged there. They actually admitted the story, even though we all heard the same thing. So in my opinion, based on years of dealing with this Western media war propaganda over Syria, it is deliberate, it is shameless, it is unscrupulous, and it is without ethics.
And to finish, the journalism seems to be the main victim of this military operation and war that is happening, because now we have like 2 blocks. In Vietnam, journalists were able to independently cover stories, go to people. Now that's absolutely impossible. We see the Western media aligned with an official version and censoring others. So in that, you know, for the future of journalism, world journalism, Western journalism, how do you see it?
It's increasingly difficult, to say the least. I mean, journalists like yourself and myself and our colleagues are being deplatformed from social media, or we're having labels slapped on us. For example, this person is a Russian whatever. And
Or
you know,
Putin propagandist.
yeah, and I've been smeared relentlessly for years, and the nature of the smear is a character assassination. It's never the content of what I'm writing or saying. It's purely character assassination. So I think with a combination of the censorship and the character assassinations makes it very difficult for us, but it does have a reverse effect as well. People who see, well, wait a second, I thought she was just a conspiracy theorist, but it turned out this person was right about particular issues that happened in the past. Maybe I'm going to stop believing the smear. So sometimes the reverse effect is that it brings new followers, new supporters. But it certainly is, they do have the might of the global media, of all the propaganda outlets working in hand together. So it certainly is an uphill battle for people like us.
Thanks, Eva. That's it for now from Donetsk, People's Republic of Donetsk.